everyone. My name is John Hanson. With Jacob Lipton, I co-direct the Systemic Justice Project at Harvard Law School. It is our pleasure to welcome you all to the 6th installment of our webinar series, Systemic Lawyering in Times of Crisis. Jacob's going to introduce today's truly remarkable panel, but before turning it over, I want to underscore how grateful we are that these extraordinarily busy people found time to participate in today's conversation. It's especially gratifying for me to have Carol Rose, a brilliant former student, and Judge Gertner, a wonderful colleague who brings not only her wise and esteemed voice to this event, but also the students from her amazing course on mass incarceration and sentencing law. Thank you all. We are in for a treat, so I'm just going to hand it over to Jacob and he'll introduce our panelists properly and we'll get the discussion started.
Thanks, John. As John said, we're incredibly grateful to this incredibly distinguished panel of three. I'll introduce in the order in which they joined. Judge Nancy Gertner is a senior lecturer at Harvard Law School. She was appointed to the bench in 1994 by President Clinton, has been an instructor at Yale Law School teaching sentencing in comparative sentencing institutions since 1998. She has received too many awards for me to name right now, but I'll mention the Thurgood Marshall Award from the American Bar Association, section of individual rights and responsibilities, which she was the second woman to receive after Justice Ginsburg. In 2011, she retired from the federal bench and became part of the faculty of Harvard Law School, where she teaches criminal law, criminal procedure, forensic science, and sentencing, and continues to teach and write about women's issues around the world. And has published books, articles, and chapters on sentencing, discrimination, forensic evidence, women's rights, and the jury system. We're incredibly honored to have her participating in this webinar. District Attorney Rachael Rollins is the Suffolk County District Attorney, which she has been since she took office on January 2nd, 2019, the 16th District Attorney, the first woman to be elected to that position in Suffolk County history. And the first woman of color ever to serve as a Massachusetts district attorney. She was elected on a platform of meaningful substantive reform to the criminal justice system, pledging to reduce incarceration, correcting racial and ethnic disparities, adopt alternatives to traditional prosecution, and focus the office's resources on serious and violent crimes, improving relationships between law enforcement agencies and the communities they serve. And much of that was codified in a policy memo, a long policy memo that the office released a couple months into her time as district attorney. She's undertaken major initiatives on unsolved homicides and external investigation and review of police-involved fatalities. Before being elected district attorney, she was a field attorney with the National Labor Relations Board in Boston, an attorney at Bingham McCutcheon. She was an assistant U.S. attorney, general counsel of the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, and also the chief legal counsel of the Massachusetts Port Authority. We're incredibly honored and grateful to you for joining us, District Attorney Rollins. Finally, Carol Rose, who is the executive director of the ACLU of Massachusetts. She has a background as a lawyer and a journalist and has spent her career advocating for human rights and civil liberties here in the United States, but also in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Japan, Sri Lanka, Israel, the West Bank and Gaza, Northern Ireland, and Vietnam. Before becoming executive director of the ACLU of Massachusetts in 2003, she worked as an attorney at Hill and Barlow, where she specialized in First Amendment and media law, intellectual property, civil rights, and international human rights law. I've gotten to work closely with Carol in the past couple of years and see what an inspiration she is at the ACLU, and her role in building the kind of organization that could pivot so immediately and thoughtfully and effectively to this current crisis. And as John mentioned, she is a former student in his corporations class. I'll just mention, we'll also be joined right at the end of the panel by Molly Coleman from the People's Parity Project, who will be talking about the way that students can get involved in some of this work. So thank you so much to the three of you for joining us. And I'm going to start with a simple question of just where you are right now and how you're doing. I'll maybe in the order that I introduced you. So Judge Gertner first.
I am in Brookline in my home office, so it doesn't feel terribly different, except that I can't see anyone and I can't go out. But other than that, I'm in my office and I now see how terrible this is, that you all have neat backgrounds and I give you a view of my desk, which is really horrifying. So I'm fine. We're fine.
Your background is great too, by the way.
DA Rollins.
I'm in my living room, my daughter's running around and my two nieces are upstairs. So I'm sure there will be some interruption from my children, but I'm doing well too. And I'm in a sweatshirt, very comfy at home, but excited about this conversation.
Carol?
Yeah, same, working from home with my, have my whole staff of people who are all working virtually. We've been virtual for a while. It's a really interesting time to think about how do you do integrated advocacy with your staff at a time when we're all remote. So this has been definitely a brave new world. But so far we're pulling through and I think it helps to be focused on the work.
Thank you. So we really want the three of you talking to each other as much as possible. But I'll kind of try and launch into that by asking each of you how your work has evolved in the past couple months in response to this crisis. So what are the biggest changes of you and your organizations?
Can I jump in really briefly on that? You were ready to go before we started. Just feel free to pick up on that conversation as you like, the three of you talking about what's happening right now, what your reactions to it are, what it means for different groups and so forth. Just feel free for this to be an organic conversation between the three of you and go to it.
So you started talking about the awesome responsibilities that you feel.
So I have a staff of about 350 approximately people that I'm responsible for as the district attorney. And that includes not only my staff that shows up every day into our 13 or 14 different physical locations, but also oversight over the Boston Police Homicide Unit, as well as the State Police Homicide and Narcotics Unit. And one of the first things I realized, all due respect to the court system, was I was not going to wait for the trial court to tell me how I was going to take care of my staff and how we were going to conduct our business. And remember, it's not just one Supreme Trial Court. Even though we all love Chief Justice Gantz and our Supreme Judicial Court in the Commonwealth, I have 4 different orders that I'm under right now. I have Chief Justice Carey for the Superior Court in Suffolk Superior Court, Chief Justice Dolly for my Chelsea District Court. I have Chief Justice Brown Bryant for my juvenile court, and all the DAs have at least those 3. But me, I have 1 more because I have the Boston Municipal Court, which is Chief Judge Ronquillo, and there are 8 different divisions of the Boston Municipal Court. And Ronquillo said, all 8 of you, first justices, you get to decide what you want to do in each of your 8. So I had 11 different orders that I was trying to scramble, and I just said, no, here's what we're doing. We are no longer handling non-violent, non-serious matters in a serious, urgent matter. We are going to only focus on the things that are really important right now, and we're going to funnel all of these other non-violent, non-serious things, hopefully when they were still available, into services, or really think creatively about how we can handle them. And then it was really important for me to be in touch with people like Rasan Hall at Carol's organization, and Matt Siegel, I believe it is, at the ACLU, as well as Anthony Benedetti, the public defender, and others, to say, here's what we're seeing, how are we going to help in this crisis? That's how I reacted immediately and put my team on shifts and immediately told them, you're not coming into the office. We need to flatten the curve. I don't care what the president is saying or how long it takes the governor or others. You're my responsibility. I want to treat you like you're my family. And how would I treat my family in this circumstance?
I just want to say what a difference a good DA makes, DA Rollins, especially in a time of crisis. You know, so many of the stuff that the ACLU and other people in the social justice movement have been pushing for we've been pushing for them all along. We've had pandemics of racism and pandemics of poverty and pandemics of substance use disorder and all these things, but we've been criminalizing them and not treating them like a public health issue for a long time. So this crisis comes with an opportunity to actually further the goals that we've been pushing for a long time, because they make it evident to everyone that the need for change is huge right now. And so in the midst of despair, I think there is actually, it's important that we keep our eyes on hope. So as a leader, so I have about 20 staff, like Rachael. We went out very early and just went virtual and had some bumps, but we got through it. The things that I did was, number one, to set a framework for the organization to take on this work, which was that civil liberties and public health are aligned more often than not, both in terms of the remedies I was just talking about, but also in terms of they're not in tension. People want to raise tension, but voluntary compliance, for example, with a shelter order is going to give you a better public health outcome as well as a better civil liberties outcome. So thinking about the framework and talking about voluntariness, talking about equity, people want to comply because they want to save their lives, but maybe they can't because they don't have childcare, they don't have paid leave. So how do we address the equity and particularly the racial equity, but also socioeconomic equity issues? So that was sort of the second piece. And then the third part of the frame that we set up was to think about the potential efforts of the bad guys to create dystopian things, that they would try to then get powers that they could keep and apply after the crisis has passed. So those three frameworks. And then we set up 7 work streams with a leader of each on my advocacy staff. And I did that in part to make sure people knew how to play in their lane, and in part to give control to my staff, because I think in times of crisis, a good leader cedes control to people to give them a sense of they can do something about this feeling of being out of control that we have. So the 7 work streams that we set up, and these they change all the time, not all the time, but we shift them when we need to. So one is decarceration was the first one, because prisons and jails are breeding grounds for virus, and even if someone has maybe done something wrong, it's not a death sentence. We don't have a death penalty here in Massachusetts, and we shouldn't have one because we condemn people to COVID-19. And so we went into court with litigation that DA Rollins was talking about. That was our first step. The second was ICE detention. And so talking about people who are being held at the federal level in civil immigration detention. And we went in, and again, with both a litigation, legislative, field, and communications strategy on that. The third stream is voting rights. We think it's important that people are able to vote by mail if they need to be able to. So we're working on a voting rights effort. The fourth area is government transparency, so that we know what the government's doing. We can, just pay attention, and also where does the money go? Who gets it? What are the equity issues that arise in that? The fifth issue is equity, talking about racial justice and equity issues. Who gets access to testing? Who gets access to ventilators? All those kinds of things that are, again, imbued with race and all of those things. I probably missed a couple. I can't remember what the other 2 are. So we set up work streams as a way to address it, and that's worked really, really well. Reproductive justice is another. That's worked really, really well as a way to align my team. And within the teams, we have litigators, legislative communications people, and field people. So they come up with their own campaigns and programs that then they roll out and we integrate. And then the last thing I did, just by way of leadership, is I immediately, early on, made sure that we were opening lines of communication to leaders like DA Rollins, also to Mayor Walsh, to Governor Baker's office, to the Speaker of the House and the Senate, President of the Senate, to the AG's office. So just sort of immediately reaching out. And I learned that actually during the Boston Marathon bombing, that it's really important to do that, because then if your lines of communication are open early on, you can then, if there are issues that arise, you can get through to the right people. And if they have questions because they maybe want to know how to avoid having a constitutional civil liberties issue, they'll call us. So that was the third thing. So it was a lot of stuff at the beginning, and now it's sort of rolling it out since then.
Well, I'm a little bit of a gadfly, as my class knows. So I'm still in the middle of teaching, and my mass incarceration class is watching right now, and we will continue. And that hat led me to write about the dangers of prisons as petri dishes as soon as this struck. And that has led me to think about, I'm actually doing another op-ed now, which is entitled "The Habits of Mass Incarceration Die Hard," which is the reverse of what you and what Carol and Rachael have been talking about. Gets to what I started saying when we were off camera about how angry I am at what I see. So what do I mean by the habits of incarceration, of mass incarceration die hard? I'm not talking about the moments of institutional intervention. Carol's, the ACLU's amazing lawsuit before the SJC about pretrial detention, the amazing lawsuits about ICE detainees, and the much more difficult time that the courts and the governors and the DAs are having with sentenced prisoners. And I want to look at that because that, it seems to me, if there was a moment of reform the past 3 or 4 years for step back, changes in New York sentencing, what we see in some areas, not all, is a return to the old tropes. So I actually have some quotes, which I may have nothing left to talk to my class about if I use these, but I nevertheless will use them. So at a hearing last week before a magistrate judge, the lawyer was arguing that the client's release should be based on the fact that he was an insulin-dependent diabetic. The lawyer cited 2 CDC studies, which found that some 30% of those who were hospitalized with COVID-19 were diabetic. The judge said she takes the CDC studies with a grain of salt because they're so novel, they don't yet have much data. At which point the lawyer said, considering that it's fatal, perhaps we should err on the side of caution. And that was a sort of interesting moment for me, which is the habits of mass incarceration are prison is a default. I don't know what to do with you, stay in prison. Some view of who's dangerous, which was profoundly changed over the past 30 years, so that drug crime is dangerous. You know, I mean, they're dangerous people, but drug crime. So people are, there's a presumption of incarceration on the federal side for drug crime. So it's both prison is a default and there are dangerous people and we have over-categorized who's dangerous. What she's saying here, she takes these studies with a grain of salt, is that she's prepared to take whatever risks are going on in prison, whatever risks. And that has to change. The notion that that calculation hasn't changed is extraordinary. And on the other side, that who is dangerous, that calculation hasn't changed. So for me, it was an interesting example of how it came to pass that we continue to incarcerate even as the crime rate fell. And there is virtually, the crime rate is falling. There have been some shootings in Boston, but drug crime, you know, drug crime has certainly declined during this period of time. And the notion that a judge would default to prison, as in fact many, not all, but many have done around the country, you know, says to me that, as I said, the habits of mass incarceration die hard. There were legitimate reasons for why some people can't be released, questions about homelessness. So then it seems to me that one should say that there's an affirmative obligation on the part of the criminal justice professionals to find a place for people because prison shouldn't be a death sentence. So I'm trying to tease out the habits of mass incarceration, why we are so stuck in incarceration, racial issues, poverty issues. And in addition to that, I'm doing some litigation with the ACLU.
So what is so fascinating to me and why I love the 2 women that I'm on this panel with is just, it is so frustrating and saddening and angering that Black and brown people lose every time. Right? No matter what we are talking about, we look at Chelsea, for example, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Chelsea is the #1 town or city that has the most positive COVID-19 individuals there because of the sort of cluster and urban sort of closeness that they're dealing with. We also have immigration issues, as Carol said earlier, where there are some people that are afraid to come forward because they're fearful of, you know, outing themselves essentially. But you're right. It's like it's part of why when I was speaking with the special master, Brian O'Connor, in this, the litigation that was originally filed in the SJC, CPCS, against Chief Justice of the Trial Court, that I was advocating along with many of the petitioners, which I'm proud to say we filed a motion to join as a petitioner, not as a respondent, because I feel far more aligned to what it is CPCS and MACDL is saying than a lot of my counterparts whose answer to everything is, but you did something wrong, so go to jail. And what I have to be better at saying is, look, there are going to be some people that, unfortunately, due to the nature of what it is they did and how recently that happened, that I am not going to be able to say your public health crisis or flattening the curve outweighs the risk you pose to the community if you return there. But that doesn't mean I want you to die. I will still be a staunch advocate and all over Secretary Turco, like stink on you know what, to say, and what's going on with defendant Rollins or, you know, prisoner 31928? Where is she? Is she isolated? Is she getting adequate medical treatment? Is she getting hand sanitizer and soap that are not diluted? Is she getting her phone calls? Does she have access to her lawyers? The problem is things are coming so fast and furious that, you know, we need the meticulous leadership of Carol to say, here are the 7 things, everyone stay in your lane and do it. We've tried to do that as well, and now we only have 2 people that look at every single one of the pretrial detainee requests that come in, because now as a result of this litigation, we get census reports or daily reports of everyone in DOC that has an underlying CDC-based health condition that makes them more susceptible to possibly testing positive to COVID-19.
That's because of the SJC case, right?
Of course, right. They should have been doing this on their own.
Right.
But for CPCS and MACDL demanding this, and this is when people lose faith in the system.
You see, the federal courts are not doing that.
Right. No, believe me.
So when you talk about systems, the federal courts are not doing that on their own. One of the reports I heard is only 1 person has tested positive at Plymouth at a pretrial detention facility, but that's, of course, they've only tested 4.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And if we look, guys, if we look at soldiers' homes, nursing homes, assisted care facilities, everyone recognizes, oh my God, we have to save these people. Look at them, they're clustered. You know, in the hierarchy, obviously everyone is a child of the world and we are all equal in a perfect world. But we know that veterans are first and elderly are second, and prisoners are, in many people's eyes, unfortunately, 50th or 60th down a line. But, you know, they're in the same exact circumstance, and there's not a Veterans Affairs for prisoners, right? They have, you know, PLA, they have CPCS, they have maybe MACDL, but they have a police department behind closed doors that is enforcing things with them, and they are already discredited because of where they are, right? So no one's listening to them at all. We need staunch advocates. We need people that are going, you know, I'm super proud of the brief that we filed, and I was sort of fighting with my team to make sure our response included an entire section where I wanted Chief Justice Gantz to have to read, prisoners sit in a room with an open toilet, butt feet from them with no lid. They share toilet paper. Like, this is the height of, you know, contamination potentially. Not to mention some of these carceral facilities won't give you hand sanitizer because it has alcohol in it. We have to take people's word for it. It's like, I'm not taking, you know, the warden or commissioner's word for it that prisoners are happy here. Like, that can't be the way that this is operating. But unfortunately, sometimes that's what we're dealing with. So, you know, for me, I am really loud about the fact that when it comes to even people that are not incarcerated, the crisis standards of care, right? These teams that are going to be making decisions about who of us gets access to care, are those culturally competent teams? Do they have people with different language skills? Are there any Black and brown people on those teams that are making decisions? And I don't want to hear, like, I took an African-American, you know, history course when I was at Harvard undergrad 48 years ago. Like, I need some real people that are like, hey, that's not fair, right? Or even hearing about Zoom and everything going to Zoom. I have a 5th grader in the Boston public school system. There are kids in her class that don't have Wi-Fi, right? We're all very privileged, myself included, to be able to sit quietly, you know, in my home where I'm protected and have, you know, heat and lights and food and everything I need and engage with you guys. There's a lot of people that don't have those just basic bare necessities as well. And certainly that's exacerbated if you're incarcerated or in a carceral facility. And that includes, guys, DYS, because no one's talking about this decision by the SJC was absolutely silent on our young people that are being housed in DYS facilities. It only talks about HOC and DOC, which for the students are House of Corrections, which are sheriffs that are elected, and Department of Corrections, which is the governor's Secretary of Executive Office of Public Safety, Secretary Turco, which are all of our MCI facilities in Massachusetts.
Just to build a little bit on what DA Rollins just said, it's really important to recognize the reality, the proximity. You know, it's hard for us because the prisons and jails are closed except for the lawyers to go in. In some places they're not, by the way. But here it's really hard to see inside incarceration facility. It's important, if you ever have an opportunity, you take it, because I think it will change your view on all of this stuff. My
class was supposed to go last
week
before to Norfolk.
Right. And even the, you know, nice ones are horrifying. And some of the stuff that we heard was just heartbreaking. Like, and DA Rollins, you probably know who it was, but one of the sheriffs, I think it was saying, like, we don't have a problem. We have distancing because we're having people like sleep head to toe, like crazy stuff like that, you know.
Or solitary confinement.
Right.
Solitary confinement as a response, as quarantining.
As an appropriate response.
Or we'll send them to go build a wall. Right.
Exactly.
My favorite.
On the other side was, I did a snippet on Fox News, which is not my usual station. I was the local affiliate, so they're actually better. But I got, for whatever reason, I probably got a dozen calls from moms and sisters of incarcerated people, just wanting to tell their story, where our intake at the ACLU has gone up massively as a result of this. There's people trying to get them out, you know. And the one that stuck with me, but was not uncharacteristic of all of them, was the mom who said, you know, my son was out, but he missed a drug test. He's 27, he has substance use disorder, he missed a drug test. He goes in for a mandatory, I think, 90 days? It shouldn't be a death sentence. Like, don't let them kill my son because he missed his drug test. I mean, that's the level of stuff that we're talking about here. And I think it's important for us, you know, Brian Stevenson of Equal Justice Initiative always says, get proximate. To get ourselves proximate intellectually, emotionally, even if we're not proximate, because even when there's not a pandemic, it's hard to get into the prisons. But I think to keep in mind, we're talking about the real lives of real people who are going to be coming back to our communities, we hope. But so when we talk about this, again, it's a public health issue. But, you know, as Matt Siegel, our legal director, said, he felt the person in the room during the hearing that nobody talked about was Willie Horton. And that the fear, and I'd love to hear more from Judge Gertner about, you know, how do we begin to get out of this bad habit? How do we break the habit of that seems to be there even in this time of crisis?
Well, I mean, I think that, so you know, there are ways. Your litigation has been enormously helpful. So the ACLU, right out of the box, filed a lawsuit dealing with sentenced prisoners and pretrial detainees in the state court. And the SJC made very interesting findings about the nature of the danger. And although they didn't deal with sentenced prisoners, set up a reporting mechanism, set up an expedition, a speedy trial essentially with respect to those people, rather than, so that was helpful. They set up a framework and they said it was important. Then there was a case in federal court, which is also an ACLU case. Is that the case for Ice detainees? The same kind of thing. Pretrial detention, Ice detainees, terribly important, really, really serious. But the hard nut are the sentenced prisoners, because pretrial detainees are already presumptively, you know, not guilty. Ice detainees is a civil detention. The hard nut is the sentenced prisoners. And I've been tracking the litigation across the country, and it is inconsistent. The Bureau of Prisons called for release of people on compassionate release and putting people in home confinement. I'm waiting for your class next year, or maybe it'll be my class, to study who are the people who are getting the benefit of this. and whether the inequities in the criminal justice system are replicating at release, right? So who gets compassionate release if you have a home and health care? You
Don't
have
get
a
me
home.
started. Can I mute, please? Can you mute me? Because I'm going to be
Never.
like, every time I see, Your Honor, every time I see Sal DeMacy walking across the street from my building alive,
Yeah,
you know, after being out for 7 years on compassionate release and meanwhile I have,
Sal DeMacy got out because I represented him, Rachel.
good job. That's
That's
why.
a
And I'm
different issue.
proud of him. I need you to represent everyone else, Your Honor.
Right.
That's
Yeah,
what I'm
there you
saying
go.
is that
Right.
when
But-
I'm not
yeah.
mad that he's out. I'm simply saying many of our other criminal defendants don't have the means by which
Right.
they get a Judge Gertner to be their counsel.
Right,
Right.
Michael Cohen is not the model here.
Right.
So the question is whether or not even the mechanisms for release of sentenced prisoners don't replicate the same racial and economic disparities that got them there in the first place.
Right.
And then you wind up with, I mean, before we went on about my anger at listening to what some, not all, judges are saying, which really just internalized all the problems. Prison is safer for you, Mr. Defendant. Well, there's almost no set of circumstances now in which that's true. There may be some, but very, very few. And we can help you make outside safer. So it's and even little things like the expedition that you saw in the SJC case. You go for a magistrate judge in the federal court and they'll say, you know, the government can respond in a week to your motion for pretrial release. And one judge, notwithstanding this emergency, was still taking 2-3 weeks to make a decision.
It's
That's
unacceptable.
extraordinary.
One of the things that was fascinating to me about the decision by Justice, I think, wasn't it Gaziano that wrote the opinion, was the strong rebuke, even though there's a separation of powers, of parole. There are 320 people currently that have been approved for parole. So the board has already done all the hard work, but there's a 2 to 4 week process where one must get what's called a parole permit. And Chief Justice Gantz was extraordinary in the 4.5-hour hearing we had on this, sort of dissecting and cross-examining his way into an answer about this 320 group of people that are in this purgatory of waiting for a parole permit. And much of it requires, you know, where are you going to go when you're released? And it's why CPCS and MACDL and I as well demanded, like you said, Your Honor, what is the racial background of the individuals that are actually getting parole? If you have a home to go to back in, you know, anywhere, but like a family that's able to even take you in, that's number one. Number two, we all know this. If your loved ones are on Section 8, you as a felon can't come back. The decision they have to make is one of two things. I love you, Nancy. You can live with me, but when they find out you're here, I lose my Section 8 voucher. I don't just lose my house or my apartment that I live in. I lose the whole voucher. Or I love you, Nancy, but you can't stay here because me and your brothers and sisters, you know, me and your daughter and brothers and sisters live here now, and we can't risk that. It's a horrible choice that people have to make. It's why, to your point, we have to start thinking about, there are 11 places in the United States pre-COVID-19 that let felons come back and live in public housing. 2 of the locations are in Vermont, which happens to be, of course, push the button, the whitest place in the world aside from Norway, right? Like, so why is it that we aren't thinking in Boston of maybe, or Suffolk County, of having a pilot where people, can we go back, can we watch and see? We need disruptors in this system to say, and how do we do this? We have strong people that say, you know what? If one of the 308 people I let out make a mistake, even if it's a bad mistake, I'm going to stand up and own that mistake and say it was still the right thing because this is less than 1% of the people we let out that made a bad decision. And I will take all of the arrows and all of the hate and all of the rage, and I will speak to that family if there is a victim that was harmed, and I will let them yell at me because they deserve that. But we continue doing what's right even when it's not popular. That's how we change this.
Can I ask about the moment of crisis as a point for that change? So you've all spoken about the way that racial and economic disparities are being recreated, and the habits of mass incarceration dying hard, and this need for disruption that you just mentioned, dear Rollins. And I wonder how you can think about using the crisis as a moment for long-term positive systemic change without losing focus on the immediate and urgent needs that are arising in this moment.
For me, the most easy, beautiful part is my list of 15 in my memo. It's now heightened, right? It's everyone's doing it. The commissioner has said out loud, not, please go out and commit crimes, but we are focusing our attention on the most violent, serious crimes, and we have postponed, basically almost gone to a kind of ticket system where if I'm outside trespassing and not listening, they're more than likely not going to arrest me. They're going to send me a notice, and I have to show up sometime when the court opens up in June, or hopefully.
But isn't that what your proposal when you started your idea? I mean, it was a sort of, I'm not going to go after small crimes whose net effect is to increase the criminal record, so then when they go before me in federal court, they suddenly have a lengthy rap sheet. And what's interesting about that is, one thing we could do is to show this worked.
Exactly.
It didn't just work at, in general. It didn't just work this moment.
Yeah.
But it works. And so arguably the lessons of decarceration, of reducing who's in the prisons, could be a lesson going forward.
And that's what people are afraid of. They're afraid that if we let you all out and for 3 months you're good, which of course everyone should be like, yay, right? That you're gonna then come back and say, look, I did it. Why are you sending me now back? And my attitude is, right, okay, let's see what happens here, right? I think it is just exposed how broken our systems are and how ill-prepared we were from the trial court. Like, Your Honor, remember when you guys were in the McCormick building and you had the Star Wars courtroom? You were not a judge then. I know you were like 10 years old back then. I was clerking for Judge Keaton. Do you know that there are some courts in our municipal and district system that can't even have a virtual arraignment? Like, I know that I come from the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I keep saying, like, wait, what? Like, I'll give you $5,000 of my own money to we should be live streaming arraignments, even if it's only audio, right? But we have now, Carol, we now don't have any access to any of the court activity that's happening. I, as the DA of Suffolk County, when we had a homicide, but 3, 4, 5 days ago, I had to make 9 phone calls, to get in on the arraignment by phone. I'm waiting right now. We have made an arrest. Somebody has been sexually assaulting trans youth. I'm, happy that we got this predator off the street, and we are gonna let this community know that we're gonna support them. I'm waiting to be called in to an arraignment that's happening. We're like in the 20s right now when it comes to being able to give the community access. And remember, Your Honor, these are all the same community members. It's overwhelmingly poor people. It's overwhelmingly Black and brown people that even if we were able to say, you can zoom into your son's arraignment, or you're the victim, you can zoom into it's like, I don't have Wi-Fi, or, my laptop doesn't, how do I zoom? Like, who's helping with all of this stuff?
That's the other side of this coin, is when this is over, will we have ceded everything to video teleconferencing, and what then will be the public access, the extent to which that will limit the right to a public trial, which is already in jeopardy. But I mean, it will raise cameras in the courtroom again, which would be, as far as I'm concerned, great. I have a list of things for you to sue on, Carol.
Great, send them over. I mean, I think the opportunities, because there's been a tear in the universe as we knew it, the opportunities with this disruption are huge if we seize it. I'm a big believer in agency, and that as advocates, as social justice warriors, such as it is, and as lawyers, we have an obligation to use these opportunities to push the envelope The other piece of that, so I mean, definitely litigating on those issues and raising those issues, because you're right, the racial disparities and the socioeconomic disparities are huge, and we're working on stuff on the standards of care, who gets the ventilator stuff. We're working on who has access to testing is going to be huge, because if you need a proof of I've got the antibody, or I'm clean and in order to go to work, right? If I need that to go to work, imagine linking your travel papers to a work authorization to a biometric surveillance thing. I mean, the dystopian stuff is like, you can spin it out, and I have lost a lot of sleep on that. But at the same time, we can build stuff, and we can use this to build. And so in addition to pointing out and thinking of all the areas that the change can come, including access to the courts and the digital divide and all the stuff we're talking about today, I also think for the ACLU that there's a real connection with public health people that we are making because of this particular pandemic, and really reaching out, because from the communications perspective, if you want to talk about your third-party validators, you have police officers who are willing to talk about social change, which are hard to get, but they're very effective, and then doctors, so the blue coats and the white coats, right? That we're trying to really build alliances with the public health community that'll stay beyond this, and then begin to think about, if we've got buy-in from a vast majority of the people about the importance of working together and addressing public health issues, let's begin to, again, or we have been doing it, but this time we can really do it, is to reframe so many of these issues as public health issues. Poverty, racism, substance use disorder, all of these things. They need public health solutions. Let's bring public health instead of incarcerating people. Let's get them help and assistance and begin to think about that. And I think within that, addressing full on, clearly, the racial disparities is a huge part of really changing the world. We're never going to go back. I don't want to go back. That wasn't good enough. I want to build something that we actually can all get behind. And I think that as painful as this whole crisis has been and will continue to be for a while, from that we can try, if we apply ourselves collectively, to build something anew. And that's what I'm looking for. Maybe it's just, my teenage kids say, you're so naive, but I don't think so. I actually think that it's possible, and I sure as hell am going to go down trying.
You bet. And I agree.
A different concept. I mean, it would be great to transform the criminal justice system, at least in part, to a system dealing with public health issues with respect to drug addiction, with respect to mental health, with respect to sort of the kind of characteristics that really define, I would say, the vast majority of the people that I sentenced. And in addition, to have a different concept of risk. I don't mean to be abstract about this, but really a different concept of risk. You throw someone in jail because you don't want to risk what'll happen to them outside. Well, what'll happen to them outside depends in part on the services that you've made available to them. It's not, it's not an abstraction. So, and you throw someone in jail rather than risk, as Rachael was talking about, they'll reoffend. Well, if you explain to people that, in fact, we know that if they go in, they could get worse under the best of circumstances. If they go into prison, they could wind up dying. The risk-reward balance is very different, and understand why we are doing that. So if we could change both the way we see crime, the way we see imprisonment, and the way we see risk, it would make an enormous difference. What I'm preparing for my class about how, the mass incarceration was incarcerating people when the crime rate continued to drop. Well, that we continue to do that even under these circumstances. And if that would change, that would be terribly important.
Can I jump in on that theme
No.
and make a comment that connects to our course and our writing on this topic, and then follow this with a question, which is that everything you're describing strikes me as the symptom of the racial inequalities and profound inequalities in our system. That why are these old habits of incarceration so hard to break? Why is there such tremendous reliance upon a set of processes and presumptions and default rules? Why is it so reflexive to say you did something wrong, so you go to jail, end of analysis? Why is it that we know so little about the lived experiences of the people we're incarcerating when we incarcerate them, or the lived experiences of them once they have a record and now have a rap sheet, and what happens next? All of those seem to be symptoms of an attempt on the part of privileged and a larger population to some degree to distance themselves from real decision making, real thinking, real knowledge, and that the habits exist not by accident, but to serve that purpose. So much of what you're saying about flipping the frame or the story or changing the narrative seems absolutely right. And if you look in history, these are the moments in which old fundamental inequalities are challenged because they're exposed. What was a public health crisis begins to be seen as a public health crisis, not a criminalization crisis. And so the question that all this leads me to is, what else besides your knowing it and seeing it up close can students do, can activists do, can community organizers do to assist in this process of bringing out you know, what you can see up close, and to push for the kind of change that we all hope follows from this?
One thing is to talk about it. One thing is to, you know, op-ed about it. And now social media allows for a much broader swatch than that. But the one thing about you said about lived experiences, the only reason I knew what the inside of a prison looked like is because I had been a criminal defense lawyer before I went on the bench. The prisons that federal judges visited didn't look like any of the prisons that I saw before I went on the bench. And so there's no question that it's easy to say you'd be safer in jail when you envision that. The people I sentenced came from a community that I had driven past and never lived in. I mean, that's another issue of the issue of proximity. So it's easy to regard them as an other. You don't live there, as Rachel was saying, you don't go to the prisons. You can then have abstract calculations of who deserves to be in or out. I think so. I think writing and talking and responding, people have to respond to stuff, letters to the editor. What happens is that we are oftentimes silent about that. And so that's part of it. And then litigation is part of it. And you know, Rachel's stuff is part of that. Carol, you need to litigate more. I think you're not litigating enough.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, I want to say I agree 100%. I mean, to everything that Judge Gertner is saying is, you know, I think what makes me very unique as a district attorney is my lived experience, right? And part of what I'm most proud of is not just that I cut my teeth, you know, appearing mostly in civil matters in front of wonderful jurists like Judge Gertner, but then did some criminal work at the U.S. Attorney's Office. But I like to tell people I prosecuted someone in the same courtroom that I sat in and watched my younger brother get sentenced from Judge Young. And so I visited prisons as a criminal defense lawyer with Marty Murphy when I was a young associate at Bingham McCutcheon, but I've also visited them as the sibling of somebody who's incarcerated. And I sat in, you know, on the 9th floor of the Moakley Courthouse. We didn't visit prisons, Your Honor. We had them brought in and walked up so they could proffer right in front of us. And then we walked back to our office and they went down and left with, you know, the marshals or whoever we had brought up to when Glenn McKinley and John Mortman and I were handling those type of cases. So it's a very removed, privileged life that we live. And it's part of why, even as DA, you know, I'm proud that not only do I meet with victims and survivors every chance I can get, because they are a part of this as well. And oftentimes they are from the same poor and Black and brown communities that our defendants might be from, not always, but sometimes. But I also make sure I go to MCI Norfolk. I visit with the AACC. I think it's my obligation as somebody who has the power to send you somewhere if I've never set foot there. And I'm fully aware that when I walk in as the DA, it's the most beautiful it's ever looked. And I'm walked through the, you know, the best sections, but it's still not a place anyone would want to go voluntarily, right? But I agree. I think we can write about it. And what I'm committed to doing is documenting, right? It's why whenever my staff says, we need 30 more lawyers, I say you get 22, and we're hiring a licensed independent clinical social worker, a data analyst, somebody who's responsible for my crime strategies bureau and looking at all of the information we have and synthesizing that. We have new positions because if we aren't showing people that right now, I think our numbers, if we look at it for, as of last week, we've reviewed more than 630 cases. Unfortunately, 563 were all pretrial, as everyone was saying. The majority of them are not, as Judge Gertner pointed out, post-conviction sentenced individuals. And anyone who says like revise and revoke or look at one of those motions in state court, that's only 60 days after you're sentenced when we get to take a quick peek in there. It's such a small group of people that even if we do revise and revokes, we're taking a droplet of water out of an ocean to say like, look at what we did, it's wonderful. But with all of those, we've agreed on 200 of those 563, and we have objected to about 295, and it's up to the judge to make a decision as to what's going to happen in those circumstances. And remember, we have obligations in Massachusetts under the Victim Rights Bill. We have to notify victims if any of their perpetrators have court dates or possibly going to be released. It's our responsibility to do that type of stuff.
And I would just say, in terms of what your students can do, I mean, a few things. They who set the frame win the game. So shift the frame. Until the last election, there hadn't been a contested DA election in Massachusetts since 1986. We did a poll. People didn't even know they were elected, that they report to the voters. We did a big voter education campaign, What a Difference a DA Makes, which I think created a space to have a public conversation and educate people about it. And then DA Rollins won overwhelmingly on a platform that was honest and not bullshit like some, anyway, and we don't endorse candidates at the ACLU. But public education matters, and change the frame. I mean, so one of the things we're talking about, because our What a Difference a DA Makes campaign had the acronym What a Damn within the office, we're thinking about what a difference a sheriff makes, and we could call it What a Sham, just saying. And so shifting the frame, thinking about a public health frame. One of the things I really like about the public health frame with civil rights and civil liberties is you protect public health, not just to protect the sick people. You protect public health because you want to protect yourself. Like, I don't want to die. I want everybody to be safe and do these public health things, not just to protect the people who are the least among us, but to protect ourselves, right? That's why Social Security has existed all these years, because FDR didn't make it needs tested just for poor people. It's for everybody, and that's a great way to keep that program intact. So I think if we could make people realize that when it comes to things like incarceration, voting rights, discrimination in housing, access to healthcare, all of these things, if these are public health issues, if poverty is a public health issue, racism is a public health issue, it isn't just about protecting the victims. It's about protecting me too, and all of us. And I think that's an easier frame to get mass support behind. And that's what we need, right? To the extent that we have democracy, we need to have mass support and people to come around to that. So I think they who set the frame win the game. So think about other ways for you to name things that aren't named, set frames that are new and are going to actually help us to move this thing forward. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is do your job. If your job is to be a law student right now, be the best damn law student there is. Do your job.
We need class. Never mind.
Get an A in Judge Gertner's class. No, but I mean, really master your craft. Really understand there's power in it. So take it seriously. See the art and the craft of it. I mean, it really matters, and know that if we all do our jobs and we're working together, good things can happen. We can punch above our weight. And then I guess the third thing I would say is, and this has I think been a theme I'm hearing from both Judge Gertner and DA Rollins, which is to get proximate. Get proximate to people who maybe, if you come from privilege, get proximate to people who don't. If you don't come from privilege, get proximate to people who do. Begin to understand that, because there are good people and bad people everywhere. Like Jacob was saying, I've lived in lots of places around the world, which is true. And I've found great, interesting, fascinating, wonderful, moral people, and I found scoundrels. They are just, it's part of the human condition. But get proximate to people and overcome any fear that you have of that, because it'll help you to find your own humanity and their humanity. And when we have that common humanity again, the frame shifts, and we're not just rescuing the other, we're rescuing ourselves.
I love it. And what I would say too, I think what's gonna, absolutely focus on your studies for sure, but you are right over the bridge from Suffolk County, right? And people expect wonderful individuals like Judge Gertner, who has been a hellraiser since she put a robe on, right? And people like Carol Rose at the ACLU or CPCS in Macville to take the positions they're taking. What's unusual is when a DA says, like, word, I'm right here beside you, out of the way, let's all together move forward. And what you saw had to happen in this litigation was 7 of my counterparts had to band together to say, no, this is terrible, please don't do anything, keep it just the way it is, in order for the very loud voice of Suffolk County. Because remember, there's 11 DAs in Massachusetts. Those 7 had to say, combined, we represent, this many people total. Please listen to our voices more than these progressive ones that we have here. So we need some unusual allegiances and alliances in order to come together. And that's why I love that ACLU will be calling me, or when we're going to make decisions. So one of the other novel things we're trying to do is we have 40 cases currently before our grand jury. And the grand jury is, of course, suspended because grand jurors are usually about 23 or so people, which are way more than you can have in the 10, the cluster of 10 people. We have 10 cases that all we have to do, it's called call the vote. All the evidence has already gone in. We just need one person to go in and sort of, not a closing argument, but remind them of everything they heard, and then have them say, true bill, as in probable cause, you can move forward with this, or no bill, Commonwealth, you failed, you didn't prove your case. And those are important because we have some people held on other things, but awaiting trial, that if we no bill, I'm getting them out of jail immediately. But I'm thinking creatively about how can we convene our grand jury potentially in maybe 4 different locations and have screens up. But I would never do that without calling CPCS, the ACLU, Lawyers for Civil Rights, and others to say, what are your concerns with this, right? We need leaders that understand. I don't look weak if I call Carol 4 times a week to say, hey, Carol, I'm thinking about doing this. What are your concerns? If Carol's going to sue me on 10 things and we can agree on 8 that I'm going to change, this is a win. You're only going to now sue me on 2. I auto-corrected on the 8, and then we can go to a cage match on those 2. But I also respect you enough to let you know so you don't find out 3 months after we've already done it, right? Yeah. So again, I am encouraging you guys. We're doing things very differently in Suffolk County, certainly in Massachusetts. I'm proud that we're leading the nation in many areas on immigration, on standing up and doing things. Get involved, even if it's a small, I can help for 3 hours a week, right? Or is there one specific policy issue you guys want my input on? My background is in X, Y, or Z, or even if you don't have a background, I want to help you do something, reach out, we're open, and we'd love to get your help. And absolutely, if you want to do that for the public defender or the federal defenders, do that too. But I want the paradigm to shift, that it's not good versus evil. Believe me, I have systems in place, and I unfortunately, have the quicksand ability to move about this fast in things. But anyone who knows me that works for me, my attitude is we're 40 years behind where we need. I only have 4 years in this position. We have to make seismic shifts. We have to think like massive changes. And I don't have time for people to say, but we're all uncomfortable about it. Speed it up. We're moving quickly.
This hour has completely flown by for me, and I just want to sit and listen to the 3 of you speak for many more hours, but I know I have to let you get back to the vital work you've all been discussing. So I want to say an enormous thank you to all of you, and hand over to Molly to quickly mention some of the ways that students can get involved in exactly what DA Rollins was just describing and in this kind of work. So I'm going to promote her to a panelist. And
while he's doing that, I just want to add, there's been a lot of great questions that have come in, and we haven't been able to get to them. We'll try to do something like this again and get to some of those questions then.
Hey everybody, this is Molly. Sorry, this is like the most anticlimactic thing ever after that incredible panel, so I will keep it really short. My My name is Molly Coleman. I'm a 3L at HLS. I'm the National Organizing Director for the People's Parity Project. And I just wanted to talk quickly about a couple of opportunities to get involved. So as those of you who have been on this webinar in the past will have heard, PPP is running a rapid response network to help those who are on the front lines of responding to the legal needs created by the COVID crisis connect with law students. So we have law students who are doing work on, setting up remote clinics to help people get unemployment insurance. We have law students who are doing work on ensuring that we have safe and secure elections that are actually accessible to all voters come November. Doing work around getting folks out of, prison, out of immigration holds. So a whole array of work, so much more that I don't have time to talk about right now. But if you're interested in getting involved, we would absolutely love to have you. There is, as you heard today, so much work to be done, so much work that we can do, especially once finals are over. So you can sign up on our website. It's peoplesparity.org/coronavirus. We know that folks are likely to have less capacity in the next couple of weeks as you take finals. That's okay, sign up now and we'll reach back out come the summer. The one other thing that I wanted to flag is that we are working with Professor Hansen and Jacob at the Systemic Justice Project and a team from Justice Catalyst to try to expand our capacity to do this work over the summer. So you might have heard me mention this last week. We know that people have lost employment over the summer to the crisis. We want to make sure that law students who want to do this work are able to do this work. So stay tuned for more information coming hopefully very soon. We should have more information on next week's webinar, but we are hoping to be able to provide opportunities for students to do this work full-time, supporting the incredible work being done by organizations like the ACLU, by our progressive prosecutors like DA Rollins. We'll be doing this work on a large scale and we'd love to have you all join us. So stay tuned for more information on that. And that is all for me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Molly. I put the link in the chat for anyone who needs that. And thank you again to our three panelists. This was really just an incredible treat and pleasure. And thank you so much.
My class has to sign into our particular Zoom doodad. Yeah, whenever. Okay.
Get an A in Judge Gertner's class.
It's past fail.
All right, bye, Carol. Bye, Your Honor. Good to speak to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you
So
so
nice
much.
meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.